Nelson Mandela stood as one of the most transformative figures of the 20th century, and his journey from political prisoner to president of South Africa provides invaluable lessons that transcend time, geography, and circumstance, offering a masterclass in leadership, resilience, and the pursuit of justice that continues to inspire millions around the world today. His 10 rules for success were not merely abstract concepts or philosophical musings, but rather principles forged in the crucible of struggle, tested through 27 years of imprisonment, and ultimately proven effective in dismantling one of history's most oppressive systems while building a new nation founded on equality and human dignity. The first rule that Mandela lived by was to demand respect from the very beginning, never allowing circumstances to diminish one's inherent worth or dignity as a human being. When he arrived at prison, facing guards who viewed him as nothing more than a number and a threat to the established order, Mandela made an immediate decision that would set the tone for his entire incarceration and beyond. He insisted that he would only respond to the name Mandela or Mr. Mandela, refusing to accept any degrading treatment or diminishment of his identity regardless of the consequences that might follow. This was not merely about semantics or stubborn pride, but rather about establishing from day one that while they could imprison his body, they could never imprison his spirit or force him to internalize their view of his inferiority. He fought the battle for dignity on that first day and every day thereafter, standing firm in his conviction that respect is not something to be earned through submission, but rather something to be claimed through unwavering self-worth. And remarkably, through this persistence and refusal to be broken, he eventually succeeded in gaining the respect even of his captors, who came to see him not as a prisoner, but as a man of extraordinary character and principle. The second rule that governed Mandela's life was to never give up on one's expectations, prayers, and dreams, regardless of how impossible they might seem or how long the journey toward their realization might take. Mandela understood deeply that the greatest glory in living does not reside in never falling, because everyone experiences setbacks, failures, and moments of despair, but rather in rising every single time one falls, in maintaining hope when hope seems foolish, and in continuing to believe in the possibility of change even when all evidence suggests that change is impossible. Throughout his decades of imprisonment, when many would have given in to bitterness, resignation, or despair, Mandela held fast to his vision of a free South Africa where all people could live together in harmony and equality. And this unwavering commitment to his dream sustained him through the darkest moments and ultimately became the foundation upon which a new nation would be built. The third principle that Mandela embraced was the willingness to change oneself rather than merely demanding that others change, recognizing that personal transformation is the prerequisite for social transformation, and that one cannot credibly ask others to evolve if one remains fixed in old patterns and prejudices. When Mandela and his colleagues became involved in conflict resolution within their country, they quickly realized that they had to confront and transform their own emotions, their own anger, their own desire for revenge, because it was useless to try changing others if they themselves could not change. The problem they faced was that their emotions, their blood as Mandela described it, screamed that it was revolting to sit down and negotiate with people who had persecuted their people for more than 3 centuries, who had treated them as subhuman, who had inflicted unspeakable suffering upon millions of innocent men, women, and children. Yet their brains, their rational minds, told them something entirely different, insisting that if they did not talk with their enemy, the country would be engulfed in flames and innocent human beings would be massacred in numbers too horrific to contemplate. And so their brains prevailed over their blood, and they sat down with those they had every reason to hate and found a path forward together. Mandela's fourth rule centered on using one's limited time on Earth wisely and purposefully, channeling energy toward transforming one's country and world into what it should be rather than wasting precious years on bitterness or vengeance. He understood that while he hated oppression and felt anger when thinking about the past and the terrible things that had been done, dwelling in that anger served no constructive purpose and would only consume the limited time that each person has to make a difference. Instead of allowing rage to dominate his existence, Mandela chose to focus his energy on the purpose of transformation, on building rather than destroying, on creating the future rather than relitigating the past, demonstrating that wisdom lies not in denying one's emotions, but in refusing to let those emotions dictate one's actions or determine one's destiny. The fifth principle that guided Mandela's leadership was the importance of taking a stand based on practical outcomes rather than ideological purity, famously expressing this through the saying that it does not matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it can catch rats. What Mandela and his movement wanted to achieve was a healthy and vibrant economy that could show full employment to their people, maximum production, and the development of social justice. And they were willing to work with anyone who supported their struggle against apartheid regardless of that supporter's other political positions or ideological affiliations. One of the mistakes that some political analysts made was assuming that because certain countries or leaders were considered enemies by Western powers, they should automatically be enemies of the anti-apartheid movement as well, but Mandela rejected this binary thinking entirely. His organization had its own independent struggle that was conducted according to its own principles and policies, and their attitude toward any country was determined solely by that country's attitude toward their struggle for freedom and equality. When leaders like Colonel Gaddafi and Fidel Castro supported their struggle to the fullest extent, providing not just rhetorical support, but actual resources, Mandela saw no reason whatsoever to hesitate in accepting that support or maintaining those relationships, because their commitment to the anti-apartheid cause was what mattered most, not whether they aligned with other nations' foreign policy preferences. Mandela's sixth rule emphasized the critical importance of humility, of never allowing success or acclaim to inflate one's ego or diminish one's humanity. When asked at age 91 what he most wanted to be remembered for, Mandela responded with characteristic humor that he would like to be remembered as a retired 91-year-old looking for a job, deflecting the grandiosity of the question while simultaneously reminding everyone that it is for humanity and society to decide how someone should be remembered, not for the individual to craft their own legacy narrative. He openly acknowledged that some had called him useless, claiming he had done nothing for his country or for humanity, and rather than bristling at such criticism, he welcomed it because it destroyed the myth that he was an angel who could not be criticized. Mandela never wanted to be considered an angel or a saint, but rather a common human being with weaknesses, some of them fundamental, who had made many mistakes throughout his life, often saying that he was not a saint unless one thinks of a saint as a sinner who keeps trying. The seventh principle that Mandela practiced was managing one's emotions through the disciplined application of reason and intelligence, allowing the brain to dominate the blood, as he so memorably phrased it. His emotions told him that the white minority was the enemy and that they should never speak with them or compromise with them in any way. But his brain insisted that if they did not talk with those people, the country would catch fire and be engulfed in rivers of blood for many years to come. And so they had to reconcile that internal conflict by allowing rational thinking to prevail over emotional reaction, demonstrating that true strength lies not in giving free rein to one's feelings, but in channeling those feelings toward constructive rather than destructive ends. Mandela's eighth rule involved having heroes and role models who inspire and elevate one's own aspirations and performance. And for him, Muhammad Ali represented such a hero not just because of his boxing prowess, but because of what he stood for and how he conducted himself. Mandela understood that admiration for others does not diminish oneself, but rather expands one's vision of what is possible and provides examples to emulate in one's own journey. The ninth principle that shaped Mandela's approach to life was developing unshakable self-confidence, which he illustrated through a beautiful story about a young man who traveled across vast plains, famous rivers, and the highest mountains, visiting all the great cities and meeting queens, princesses, actresses, and influential women from both rural and urban areas in search of the perfect wife. After circling the world without finding the girl he sought, he returned to his homeland dying of disappointment, only to discover upon entering his village that the girl of his dreams had been living next door all along, someone he had known since childhood, but had never truly seen until he had developed the confidence and perspective to recognize her worth. This story encapsulates Mandela's conviction that every individual must develop confidence in themselves because each person is not just an asset to the nation, but possesses unique abilities and qualities that can lead them to the top. And when combined with education as the best instrument for serving society, self-confidence becomes the foundation for both personal success and social transformation. The 10th and final rule that Mandela embodied was proving others wrong through achievement rather than argument, demonstrating through action that their limited expectations and prejudices have no basis in reality. He shared a memorable story about answering a phone call from a woman who became increasingly hostile during their conversation, ultimately revealing that she possessed a matriculation certificate and declaring that he would never be in her class before hanging up. But Mandela relished the thought of her discovering that he had not only earned his own matriculation, but had gone far beyond it, breaking through every barrier and limitation that people like her had assumed would contain him forever. When Mandela stood trial in 1964 and faced the very real possibility of execution for conspiracy against the state, he delivered words that would echo through history, explaining that he was willing to die not out of bravado, but because he genuinely believed they were going to hang him, and because it is the desire of every freedom fighter to disappear under a cloud of glory rather than shame. At that moment, he had already dedicated his life to the struggle of the African people, fighting against both white domination and black domination, cherishing the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all people live together in harmony, with equal opportunities, an ideal for which he hoped to live and see realized, but for which he was fully prepared to die if necessary. Words that demonstrated the depth of his commitment and the nobility of his cause. Now it is your turn to embrace these 10 revolutionary rules and transform them from historical lessons into personal action. Commit today to demanding respect in every interaction, never surrendering your dreams despite obstacles, continuously evolving as a person, using your time purposefully, taking principled stands, practicing genuine humility, managing emotions with wisdom, finding inspiring heroes, building unshakable self-confidence, and proving doubters wrong through extraordinary achievement, because the world desperately needs more leaders who embody Mandela's combination of strength and compassion, conviction and flexibility, determination and forgiveness.